Well, I've got an organ donor here for the mirror and the back. This is one I found in one of my boxes. Now this camera obviously came to me in this state because I do not take the front off the camera without having removed the base first. And somebody obviously has in this case. So I'm going to take the mirror from this body, take the back, which is not perfect, but it's far and away better than what we started with. I can also probably take the leatherette from the base. If I can't clean the other one up, that'll become my new one. And it'll only leave me having to find pieces of leatherette for the front sides. I'll also be able to reclaim the spring that was missing. So this is going to be my parts supply for this camera in the main. And we'll transfer those bits into here. So first I'm just going to check this mirror, see if it's loose in its holder, and it is. And I've got to see if I can wriggle that mirror out. Now that's a little bit dusty. I'm going to clean that before I fit it. I'm going to do that in an ultrasonic cleaner. I'm not going to touch the surface. But first I've got to encourage this mirror out of its tray. And that is usually a bit awkward. Yeah, it's on the way. Now, without touching the front surface of the first surface of this mirror, I've got to go and clean that. I'll do that in the ultrasonic cleaner. I'll put that to one side for the moment. I need to reclaim this back. And the camera back is held in by 3 screws. This Retina Reflex S body is a slightly later example. I think I mentioned the one that we had as a sort of an intermediate example because of the meter cord, the way the meter cord was coupled. This is the more common type. The arm, it's pivoted here on a single arm with a single strong spring. There's our back, and that can go on our body. So I'll get those 3 screws in, and my video camera is telling me that the battery is just about flat. So if it suddenly cuts off in mid-sentence, you'll know why. Here's our back. It's got a dirty mark here. The leatherette's lifting a bit at the end. I'll put some adhesive under that. But otherwise, it's $1 million compared with the other one. So I've got to go and do that mirror. I'll be back shortly. Alright, I'm back with my front surface mirror back from the ultrasonic cleaner. It's looking pretty good. I can see a little spot on one end there. I'm not sure what that is. Bit chipped at the back edge there. That's a shame. That's is that a front edge? Let's have a look. A front edge, I think. Let's get this thing in. That's it. Now that's fine, that's all clipped into place. It's got a little chip at that edge at the bottom there. That's not going to cause us any problems. That should be fine. So that's our mirror in place. It's not perfect, but compared with what we started with, it's $1 million. That's the one we started with. You see, it's not very well. Just out of interest, I might run that through the ultrasonic cleaner and see how it appears afterwards, but not just at the moment. Alright, so far so good. Got it back on our camera. We've got a mirror that looks like it's useful again. Now, one of the things I'm going to do with this is I'm going to lift the mirror and put a little drop of glue underneath it here so that it stays on the tray, doesn't shuffle forward slightly. They're supposed to be held fairly firmly at the corners and they're not. If the mirror moves forward, what happens is it will scrape on the back of the front plate and that'll stop the mechanism from working reliably. It can be a very hard fault to track down. Everything appears to work normally 9 times out of 10 and then suddenly the shutter won't work properly. And sometimes it's because the mirror has shifted forward and it's just rubbing on the back of the front plate. Often you don't see it until you've finished doing your adjustments at the front to get the focus distance correct. So I'll do that. I'll put a drop of glue there and I've got to find that spring. I was going to steal one out of the base of that camera, but I'd much rather you take a spring that's loose and sitting loose in a container at the moment than take that body apart any further than it currently is. Spare parts or spare part bodies are at their most useful stage when they are almost fully complete. Back shortly. While I'm waiting for my ultrasonic cleaner to finish doing what I want it to do, I'm just going to see if I can get this shutter control ring assembly apart. I've just sprayed this with some solvent, some naphtha, nothing too horrendous, because I think it's probably glued together with dried oil. So I thought I'll spray some of that on there, or tip some of that on there and see if I can get this to move. And that was moving, so I think I should be able to pry this apart. Of course, I've got to be careful not to apply too much force to it because I don't want to distort anything. Nice, it's lifting. Some more solvent, I think. That just snapped back into place then, which should have freed that up to rotate, but it didn't. This is always a tight fit, this piece. It only has to be canted over a few degrees and it all locks up. It's possible it won't come apart because it is distorted, that someone has screwed this back down with things out of line and something is actually twisted out of shape. I should be able to rotate this thing on the base, but it doesn't want to go. It's just this bronze ring on the aluminium body that's stuck. The actual aperture ring will move. Now something's rotating. That's just the aperture rings rotating. It's very much like it's glued there. I want to, being a bit cautious with my solvents, I don't want to wash away all traces of paint in the engravings here, even though they look pretty washed out already. Try from the front. I need to be able to rotate this bronze ring around until this cutout here lines up with that wheel, but it doesn't want to rotate. Not even a little bit. And I'll bring you back once I've got that fought off. Success, I've got the thing off. What can I see in here? Dried grease. Very, very dried grease, like concrete. Very sticky. The sort of, you can probably see the colour of that. It's green. Now, green grease, of course, usually goes in the phrase, the dreaded green Agfa grease. Well, whatever grease it was that Agfa used, I think that this is the same stuff that's been used here. And it stopped this piece from being able to rotate at all. It's just glued it in position. So I think that will need to be soaked in the degreaser until I can get all of that stuff off there. And likewise its mate here, until this piece will freely rotate on this section. Now that's not something that I've struck on one before, so I suspect that it's a grease that someone has used when this camera was previously serviced. And given what we know about ag for grease and the ages of the cameras you see it on, I'd say that was probably right back in the 60s. See, that should rotate freely on there, but it's very reluctant. So we get rid of all traces of that muck until those parts revolve smoothly. Well, it's 10 to 9 in the morning. It seems like half the day is gone already. I've been busy doing all manner of emails and tasks. I'm going to continue cleaning this component up, get rid of all of that sticky grease. So be very careful with this spring not to damage it. If it gets twisted or distorted, it won't run freely. This very front edge here, there's often a lot of ingrained dirt in there. I'll see if I can encourage that out. That seems good. I'll check the little pinion rolls smoothly, and it does. And I'm just cleaning the outer surface now. That looks good. This bronze ring or brass ring here, this was very sticky with old grease. The outside surface doesn't appear too bad. The inside surface is worse, I think. That's where the bulk of that grease was. These components on the front of the shutter require very light lubrication. Otherwise the action of the changing the aperture and shutter speed combination and moving the meter are very stiff. In this case they were so stiff that it was completely frozen up, but that is very unusual. Normally they're just stiff enough to be a nuisance. Right, that looks promising. I'm checking that this little wheel revolves smoothly. It does. That doesn't come as a great surprise. That part was moving smoothly before we started. You could see the dial for the shutter speed and the aperture setting were counter-rotating smoothly. They just wouldn't go any, you just couldn't move the combination over. So again, I'm just making sure that I get rid of any old grease that's in here. No, that's not bad by any means. It was that brass ring that seemed to be the problem. That surface is a bit sticky. That looks better. So I'll just test fit these components together and see if they move smoothly. There's a little hook visible on this ring here with the aperture settings on it. That has to hook into the end of the spring. And you stretch it out slightly, and the tab on that ring drops into the slot. That rotates smoothly. Now this ring, I've got no lubricant at all on there at the moment. I want to see how this works, whether it moves. That is rotating. It's not as smooth as I'd like. No, that's all right, that's good. So with very light lubricant on there, I'll use some molybdenum paste on that. That'll be fine. So that component, that's quite happy now. I'll pop that to one side. We won't be fitting that back to the camera for some time to come. I'll clean up its mates. This is the shutter speed setting ring. Because of these plastic knobs on here, I'm being very careful not to splash any solvent on it. It'd be nice to say that no one else has, but they have. Those plastic knobs are quite scarred up. The surface looks melted. That means that solvent has been splashed on those and it's melted the plastic. I can probably improve the look of them. They're unbroken, so I'm not going to replace them because I don't really have a great stock of unbroken speed knobs. Typically how they come to be broken is each of them is held in place with two tiny screws. And what tends to happen is one or other of the screws will work loose, and then the plastic is no longer held firmly, and before too long it twists in some unfortunate fashion and it all goes bad. They just tend to crack. So yeah, I'll have a go at cleaning up that surface. It's not bad, it should clean up well. I've just got to take off that surface roughness. The back face, it looks worse, but no one ever sees the back face. The final part of the puzzle for the front rings here is this little ring here. That's job is to open the aperture on the lens when the shutter is cocked. It's very important that this runs freely, of course, otherwise the aperture doesn't, the diaphragm doesn't stop down promptly, and the whole action of the shutter can be halted at that stage if things don't move correctly. It's a bit stained. I don't think there's any deposit on there, I think it's just a bit of staining. Oh, that looks good, so that should be fine. Right, I think I will continue next with the body. I'll go and clean the parts that are in the degreaser. I'll bring them back cleaned and start working reassembling the body, and then move to doing the shutter. I have most of the components are back now from cleaning, so I can start reassembling the camera body. The body is cleaned pretty much as well as I can get it cleaned, so I think that'll do quite nicely for our purposes. Got a new camera back on there, of course, because the original one was not very happy. This one I notice is very dull at this corner, and I know exactly what's happened with that. That is a thumbprint. Somebody with solvent on their hands has held their thumb against that, and it's melted into into that leatherette. That's alright, it's still a much better leatherette than we had to start off with, so we're ahead. But that might, yeah, that's an interesting one. Alright, so I've got to start with this. So where shall I start? Well, I think I'll start with something easy. We'll put the tripod socket back in the body. First we have this piece, and this piece is just where the bottom of your film cassette sits. That's the well that it sits into. You can probably see some scarring on there. That's where somebody has wound their tripod screw in there a little bit too far and damaged it. I have seen that piece really domed up where somebody has run a screwdriver, run the tripod socket in there that was much too long and just kept going. The tripod socket here often is loose on a Retina camera. That's quite normal. Partly it's because screws will just work loose anyway naturally. That's just life as we know it. And partly it's because people abuse it by doing terrible things with tripod screws. So that's in, that's good, that's there to stay. Our lock lever and release lever really need to go on next. I've got them here. We'll start with the lock lever. The lock lever's job is to lock the film advance when the end of the film is reached, assuming that you've set the frame counter correctly, of course. So I'll just take a bit of molybdenum paste and just wipe it into the holes there, into this area of the body where the spring on the release lever will run, into the two holes at the top of the body where these rods will come through. So first our lock lever drops in there. I'll check that that's free, that appears good. I need to fit its return spring. Now there are two springs that look much the same. In this case the one on the lock lever is both shorter and it's finer wire. Fit that clip back in place. Usually turn that round the other way. If I can get it to turn. You get slightly better clearance on the film release button. I mean, it shouldn't make any difference, but a little bit of extra clearance can't hurt. So that lock lever is all in place, pops back into place smoothly. The release lever. Now the release lever's job is to free up the film advance lever to allow you to wind on to the next shot after you have pressed the shutter release. So it has a little spring on the base here which swings this lever across and keeps it in contact with the cam on the bottom of the film advance shaft. And I've taken this off while I cleaned the components so that it didn't get damaged or lost. Because fine springs catch on things and then they get buggered up, and that's causes you any amount of grief. So that drops into that hole in the body. Being very careful not to catch the spring over the top of the body or anything. You can see the shaft comes up through here. And its return spring is both longer and heavier wire than the one on the lock lever. Just get that run down a bit. Just check that, and it's good. That's our lock lever and release lever in place in the body. Now I need to put in the film advance shaft. So I'm checking this, checking the action of it, looking at the state of the shaft, making sure that the cam here on the end is not rattling loose on the shaft. This shaft doesn't look bent at all, it all looks good. And I lubricate this with a bit of graphite grease. So I'll pull back that spring, run some round above the collar where it mounts to the base of the camera, pull the collar back, run some round the shaft itself, rotate that a few times, make sure that grease has worked well in there. It's good, it doesn't take much. I'll run some onto the spring itself so that the coils of the spring slide over each other smoothly, and they do. That's it for the graphite grease for the moment. Now my hands are covered in it. I'm taking some synthetic grease, which is a lot less messy. I'll run it around the cam surfaces on the bottom and the top of this. This is the bottom side here we've got now, just so that the lock lever will drop in smoothly and the release lever will move smoothly across those positions. We have our take-up spool and the take-up spool bush. The bush goes into the plain end of the take-up spool. The other end has got that slot in the top where it connects up with the film advance mechanism. So this just drops into the body and in the film cassette, the take-up spool end. And now we've got to get this all back in place. So normally I'll pull up the lock lever and swing it to one side. Drop my film advance shaft into the, let's get that out of the way, it's not wanting to go past there, that's better. Drop my film advance shaft in, and I know from experience I want to start it about that position, which is a third of a turn further than I would normally position it for a rangefinder retina, because we need a little bit more oomph on the return spring to return the film advance lever smoothly to the rest position, because of all the extra load with the cocking rack and so forth through to the front of the camera. And that extra third of a turn certainly does the job. So those 3 mounting screws, I'll check that they are all tight. That's good. If that's rotated a third of a turn now, it'll drop it into its normal rest position. Of course, we're going to add an extra turn of tension on there shortly, but that just puts it in the park position. That's where it would normally be. Here's some other components here for the film advance mechanism, and I've got to get all these prepared. So the first thing I need to do is assemble the clutch. The clutch is 3 pieces. And again, I use the graphite grease when I'm assembling the clutch because I like the way it feels. Now I'll just find the right tool.